Hello friends, my name is Manon behind the blog and YouTube channel La Petite Bête, and today I'm going to share one of my secrets. Many of you have been asking for pizza dough recipes, and today we're going to make my two favorite pizza dough recipe, a standard one with yeast and my sourdough pizza recipe. First things first, since you all are looking to shop for a Forno Venetzia oven, or you already own a Forno Venetzia wood-fired oven, you need to know that when you make pizza dough, the recipe is going to be different depending on the temperature you're going to cook your pizza in. For bread making and pizza dough, we usually use a term called dough hydration, which simply is the amount of water in relationship to the amount of flour. So if you have 500 grams or 500 milliliters of water to 1 kilogram of flour, this is a 50% hydration. There is an inverse relationship between the ideal dough hydration and your oven temperature. The higher you're gonna cook your pizza in, the lower the hydration of your dough should be. Why? Because the longer the pizza dough stays in the oven, so in my home oven, for example, it might take 10, 12, 15 minutes. The water's gonna have time to evaporate from the dough, but in your pizza oven, it goes super fast. So if you have too much hydration in your dough, it's not gonna cook properly. Now, if you're just starting to make pizza in your Forno Venetzia, I recommend getting to a temperature of about 650 to 675 on the floor and about 6 to 650 on your gauge on your oven. What we try to do is to keep it around these levels, and it makes for an easier cook, time to turn it around, time to see what's happening, less burns, more success. At these temperatures, we're working with 65% hydration dough. So if you're gonna cook at higher temp, reduce the water a tiny bit. Another important point. Can you make this dough recipe by hand? Of course you can. Italian mamas, they would do it on the counter and they didn't have a machine. But if you do own a stand mixer, just use the dough attachment. It makes your life much easier. However, some people tend to say that it's better by hand. Do I make them by hand? No, I use my machine. I have a Thermomix, I have a stand mixer. I actually have two stand mixers, so I can do a sourdough recipe and a regular yeast recipe side by side, which we have done. Which one do we prefer? I must say that I prefer the sourdough recipe that I'm gonna show you today. My husband prefers the regular yeast recipe, so for you to choose. Another very important tip, please buy a scale. When you're making breads and doughs, it is so much more precise. It will make your life much easier. It's super cheap. They're easy to find. They last a lifetime. No, it's not true. They don't last a lifetime, but they last a long time. So we're gonna give you the instructions on the Forno Venetzia blog. The recipes are there and the instructions are in grams. Don't ask me the cups. I'm not gonna give them to you. Both of the recipes we're making today are gonna make 4 pizza dough, about 10 to 12 inch, regular size for your pizza oven. Let's make our basic yeasted pizza dough. I'm gonna start off with 325 grams of water. For the yeast, I'm using instant yeast. You can use active dry yeast. Just make sure it's fresh. Look at the date on the little packet, sachet here. And once it's open, if you have a larger container such as this one, keep in the fridge. Always in the fridge, and look at the date. Something important I need to tell you. Why is bread an enemy in many recipes these days and people are reducing their carbs? There is no point in rushing this process. The longer the dough sits, the better taste it's gonna have. It's gonna be pre-fermented. It's gonna be easier to digest. It's better for you. It's better for the dough. Take your time. Okay? To the water, I'm gonna add my yeast. If you're using active dry yeast, you can wait about 10 minutes to make sure it's active. It's gonna start foaming, and that's a good sign to make sure before you do your dough. Because I intend to let my dough rest for 24 to 48 hours, I'm using 5 grams of yeast. I don't need to put any more than that. If you like to use fresh yeast or brewer's yeast, use about 20 grams because you need more of these types of yeast. You know you make a lot of pizzas when you hold your 00 flour in one of these containers. So 500 grams of flour. This is 00 flour. It stands for very, very, very fine flour. You can mix. I've done, my husband may not agree with this, but I've added up to 10% of whole wheat, einkorn, emmer, some really good flours to add some texture and taste. But the basic recipe is with 500 grams of 00 flour. And to finish, I'm gonna add 10 grams of salt. I like to use sea salt. Now, la mamma italiana would tell you to make a well with the flour and put the wet ingredient in the middle. And this mama is gonna tell you to use a spatula and just mix it as such. Then you can use your hands. We're not gonna do the whole kneading at this stage. I'm gonna let it rest for about 15 minutes, let the flour absorb the water. During that time, we're gonna start the sourdough recipe. All instructions are on the blog, don't forget. Now for the sourdough recipe. You might see recipes for pizza dough using biga. Biga is basically an express sourdough. It's a mix of flour and water that you let ferment, but only like 24 hours. This is a real natural sourdough. It's the one I use to make my bread. You see it's bubbling, so it's nice and active. It's a liquid sourdough, which means 50% flour, 50% water. To make my sourdough, I used organic, unbleached white flour and filtered water. I've been using this sourdough for more than 10 years. Part of it comes from France, part of it comes from me. It's a beautiful baby. Okay, so now this one I'm gonna do in my Thermomix. You could use the bowl of your stand mixer. I'm gonna start with 300 grams of lukewarm water. Now I'm gonna add 170 grams of my sourdough. You'll know if my sourdough is good to go. Look, it's floating. Really good. That's what we like to see. 16 grams olive oil. In this particular recipe, I'm complicating things a little bit because I'm a perfectionist. You're gonna use a portion of 00 flour, a portion of unbleached white bread flour or all-purpose bread flour, and you're gonna use 10% whole wheat or einkorn flour or rye, just a good whole grain. You don't have to, you could go with just 500 grams of half 00, half regular white, okay? So now I'm going to use 225 grams of unbleached white flour, another 225 grams of 00, and here I have beautiful einkorn flour that I milled myself, and I'm going to use 50 grams of that just to give texture and additional taste. You could use whole wheat, 10 grams of salt, sea salt. Sometimes the scale is not great with small quantities, so it's about 2 teaspoons. So just like we did for the regular yeasted dough, we're just gonna mix the ingredients together in my mixer for about 3 minutes. I'm gonna let it rest for 15 minutes, and then I'm gonna do a kneading with the machine for 8 minutes. The yeasted dough we can start kneading by hand, and that's, you know, very standard. Keep some flour close by in case it starts to stick. But try not to add more flour if you can, because it could dry up the dough. Beautiful dough, you see? It's nice and smooth. It's not sticking at all, but depending on the flour you're using or the temperature in your home, you might need to dust your counter space with a bit of flour. And if you see that it's overly wet or sticky, you can add a bit of flour or water. The more you make pizza doughs, the better it'll be. Now I'm gonna transfer my dough ball in a well-oiled bowl. Voila. Okay, so now here we have both recipes. I have my sourdough pizza dough and my regular yeast pizza dough, which I think I'm gonna mark, although this one I may recognize because I've added a bit of whole wheat, it's different color. I'm both gonna let these rest for the afternoon. It's pretty cold in here, so I don't expect them to double up. I don't think it needs to double up. 2, 3, 4 hours should be sufficient. If you're looking at this video and it's super hot in the summer, you want to do the opposite. You want to leave these doughs to rest in the coldest area of your house. Again, the point is not to speed this up. The point is to slow it down to get maximum flavor out of your pizza dough. Once they have risen for a little bit, I'm gonna separate each of my dough recipe into 4 pizza balls. You can wrap it up or put it in a container you're gonna cover. I leave mine in the fridge for 24 to 48 hours. Could be in the garage. The higher the temperature, the faster it's gonna ferment. You do not want these doughs to over ferment because they're gonna tear. They're gonna lose all of their elasticity, and when it's time to shape your pizza, you're gonna end up with a fougasse. You know what a fougasse is? Yeah, holes in the pizza dough. There are several methods to stretch your pizza dough. Here are my top tips. Don't use a rolling pin. Stay away from the edges. If it keeps retracting on you, leave it and come back to it in 10 minutes. If you did your job well, both these doughs will stretch beautifully. And there, my friends, is the perfect pizza.